On the night of October 16th, 1859, Harper's Ferry, Virginia, an event occurred that will mark a key point towards emancipation. Captain John Brown led almost 24 slaves and abolitionists to fight for their right to be heard. Lives were lost, and history was created. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, the rights of relevant RiffRaff. John Brown was an interesting figure. According to a biography written by John Edwin Cook, he described John Brown's appearance as a person. John Brown would not strike one who saw him as being a very tall man. He stooped somewhat as he walked, and was rather narrow-shouldered. This picture, which was shown before, is John Brown in his last year of living, 1859. He was an old but serious man, and was a strong abolitionist. He felt that it was his right to possibly abolish slavery once and for all. John Brown wanted to raid Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and fight against the Federal Army to possibly end slavery. He wanted to get guns in the hands of slaves across America. Slaves could use these guns to take over their slave master. John Brown was joined by freed slaves, escaped slaves, and white abolitionists. It was not only John Brown who performed this raid. Slaves as well as fellow abolitionists joined, 17 white men and 5 Negroes. John Brown's chief aide of the operation was John E. Cook. John Cook lived both in and near Harper's Ferry for many years. Since he had resided in Harper's Ferry, he knew the place very well. In fact, at one point in his career, he operated the locks at the canal separating mainland from the armory. It was his responsibility to get everyone over there, into the armory with stealth. John Brown and his men held these places for 2 nights, until the morning of Tuesday, October 18th, 1859, when United States Marines, under the leadership of Robert E. Lee, stormed the armory. They eventually took John Brown and placed him under arrest. Reporters visited Harper's Ferry on the 18th and 19th of October, and were present at an interview between Senator Mason, Congressman Vallanham of Ohio, and the prisoner, John Brown. Key points of the conversation proved not only the reason of why he performed this raid, but opinions that vividly depict his ideas. Reporters took notes of the entire interview and recorded the interview verbatim. Here's a small portion of that interview. Mr. Mason asked a question that was directed towards John Brown, and he asked, "What was your object in coming?" Brown responds, "We came to free the slaves, and only that." Brown is then asked a question by Congressman Vallanham, and it says, "Brown, suppose you have every Negro in the United States. What would you do with them?" Brown replied and said he would set them free. Then he was asked, "Your intention was to carry them off and free them?" And then he answered, "No, not at all." A bystander rebutted in and then replied, "To set them free would sacrifice the life of every man in this community." Mr. Brown replied with simple, "I do not think so." Bystander then asked, "I know it. I think you are fanatical." Mr. Brown then replied, "And I think you are fanatical. Whom the gods would destroy they first made mad, and you are mad." The final question Brown was asked was it your only object to free the Negroes? And he said, "Absolutely our only objective." John Brown was brought to court in Charleston, Virginia, a week after being arrested. After 2 days of trial, the grand jury developed the verdict, or true bill. John Brown will be sentenced to death on 3 counts. The first was conspiring with Negroes to produce insurrection. Second was for treason in the Commonwealth. And the third, and most severe, was for murder. It was the right of the court to fulfill these counts, and their responsibility to bring justice towards the situation. The law disagreed with what John Brown had done, and it was John Brown's responsibility to accept this consequence. John Brown was devastated. However, he knew that what he had done felt right. It took 4 weeks until the day had come for John Brown to be executed. He had written a note directed towards anyone who would read it, and it said this: I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done. John Brown was also known for writing several letters towards his family. The last letter he ever wrote to his family was on November 30th, 1859. He had to write his final wishes. These final wishes were that his family be condemned under the grace of God. But as you can see, he went on for almost 2 pages, including his will. Although John Brown planned on slaves killing their owners, any abolitionist would have wanted the same thing. But it was only John Brown that attempted to fulfill the dream of abolishing slavery once and for all.